Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Michael's class on drawing adult facial proportions. I'm so excited to see so many new faces tonight. I saw this class had a very huge registration list. I was very excited. So I am Adrienne Hodge, your instructor for tonight, and I have been teaching this series of classes for Michael's since July 2021. And I am a teaching artist based in Austin, Texas. I've been teaching adults for almost 10 years, and I've been teaching all ages for even longer than that. I've taught in public school, museum settings, community art, and most recently the corporate sector. And and I've been doing these classes for Michael's for quite a while now, and I'm excited for all the things that I have planned in the months ahead. And tonight's class is on adult facial proportions, like I said, and then next week we'll be doing child facial proportions, children's facial proportions. And I've got a couple reference images for you to use, but what we're going to do tonight can be applied to any photograph of any adult or child. So I love that I'm seeing so many people saying hello in the chat from all over the place. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies, and our lovely moderator Chanel will handle the chat and filter through questions or comments as we go along. But welcome, and I love seeing where everybody is from, if I had time to read it all. Okay, so don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow or tag me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And make sure you tag me if you share any work from tonight's class or any class that I teach with Michaels, because sometimes if you're wanting me to see it, it can get buried with those hashtags. But if you tag me, then I'll be sure to see it. You can just tag me in the comments under the image, or you can send it to me. I love it when I get messages with people's work from these classes if they, didn't want to share online. I'm also on Facebook at I'm Adrienne Hodge Fine Art on Facebook, and here's a couple of my business cards with some of my ethereal skyscapes that I've been known to do using calligraphy ink. Okay, so tonight is a pretty simple, straightforward supply list. Basically, just need some sketching pencils and an eraser and some drawing paper. And I am using the Canson drawing paper from Michaels, the 9x12 sketchbook. And then I've got the Faber-Castell little 6-pack here, and an eraser, synthetic eraser by Faber-Castell that I got at Michael's. And I'm mostly going to be using just an HB pencil to start, which is like a number 2 pencil. You could also use an H pencil for your really light lines to get started here. But I'm always going to use a pencil that's a little bit darker than the pencil that I want you to use. And that is specifically just so that you can see my lines on Zoom, because I've learned the hard way, if I use the pencil I want the audience to be using, it's likely that my lines are not going to show up on the Zoom. Okay, so, and then I included these 2 reference photos. This one of one of my best friends since childhood, call her my sister, Aubrey. And then this is my boyfriend, Ryan. So we're drawing them because I've got these photos where there's no background and you can see their full heads, although Aubrey's hair does go a little higher there, but we can still imagine where the crown of her head is, and we can see the crown of the head here. So if you want to use any other reference images, I recommend that you find photographs where you can see the full head, because we're really talking about the proportions of the human head a lot tonight. And yeah, if you can't see the top of the head, then you're going to have to imagine where the top of the head is, and that could get tricky. And if you have a printout of these photos, that would be even better. And then we can draw directly on top of the photographs, because I'm probably going to draw on top of these photographs as I go. Okay, so before we get started, I'm going to switch back to my forward-facing view for just a second here and just talk about what I mean by the crown of the head. So when we're talking about human proportions of the head, we're looking at the full head from the crown of the head to the chin, and we're creating approximate measurements from here to here. So we're not looking at here, we're not looking at the top of the forehead or where the hairline, you know, starts or ends, and we're not looking at, you know, we're not looking at hair, we're looking at the crown of the head. And a lot of people get confused because they're thinking of hairline as being the start of the measurement of the face. And that's not going to be helpful to you. If you take a book and balance it on the top of your head, so like even go ahead and take like a sketchbook if you have it nearby, balance your sketchbook on top of your head. And if you have a ruler nearby, as it wasn't on the supply list, but if you happen to have a ruler, you can take your ruler and you can put it there at where the crown of your head is, and then you can find your chin line like this, and then remove all that, and you can see what your head length is. And then everything we're talking about tonight is an approximation, and I'm going to use the words thereabouts, usually, approximately, those sorts of things a lot, because there is no such thing as the perfectly proportioned head. So everyone's facial features are measured according to that person's head and their facial features in reference to each other, to the measurements of their head. So the average person has eyes about halfway down from the top of their head. So it's the center of the eye line is generally about halfway down from the crown of the head. Sometimes it's not exactly on that center line though. Sometimes it's just above or just below, but it's, you know, somewhere around there is going to be the halfway mark. So that's what we're going to start drawing, and it's just helpful to visually, you know, balance that book on the crown of the head so everybody sees what I'm talking about. Because then the drawing, sometimes it can still maybe feel like it's, you know, depending on where the, you know, how the person's head is tilted, it can feel like it's somewhere close to the hairline. But we're talking about, yeah, the very tippy top of the head. All right, so let's get started with the shape of the head. I'm just gonna bring my paper this way because I'm left-handed, so that spiral doesn't hit my arm. All right, so I'm gonna start out and sketch a nice big circle. And I might take up a full page with each of these heads that we sketched tonight, so feel free to go big. So we've got a nice circle shape. And then off of that, I'm going to draw a half oval shape, a little tapered shape, and that's going to give me an egg shape. So like I said, this is the question I get asked more than any other question in these classes. So for all you newcomers tonight, I'm going to say it again. I'm using an HB pencil, and I might even go a little darker so that it will show up on screen. I'm going to grab just a B pencil, but I want you to use, excuse me, I knocked my camera. I want you to use an H pencil. And if you are unfamiliar with what the letters and numbers on the pencils mean, what they stand for, you can refer back to the very first class that we had in this series. It was called Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms. And I talk all about at length the numbers and letters on the pencils and break them down so that you can, have an understanding of what those letters and numbers mean. So an H pencil is going to be nice and light and have hard graphite in it. And you're going to want to always draw on the side of the pencil, parallel to the paper, not pointing it straight down when you're using an H pencil, so that you can get lines that are very easy to erase and just sitting on the surface of the paper. And then your B pencils are usually for adding your darker values and shadows once you've established where things are going to go. So if I was drawing by myself right now at my desk and I wasn't drawing for 330 people on Zoom, I would not be using a B pencil for this. The only reason I'm using a B pencil is so that my lines will show up on the screen. If I use an H pencil, you just will not see them. And then what's the point of me teaching if you can't see what I'm doing? Okay, so you use an H pencil and I'm going to use a dark pencil just so that you can see the lines. Okay, so we've got our egg shape. We've got a nice big circle and then a tapered oval shape coming off of that. So we have an egg shape, and then we can go ahead and erase that circle part there, or just ignore it. If you're drawing nice and light with an H pencil, then it's not even bothering you. And then we're going to find the vertical axis of this head. And then we're going to find the horizontal axis of the head. So about halfway down vertically and halfway down horizontally. Okay. And then let's look at, so instead of going through all the basic facial features of a generic head, what we're doing tonight is we're looking at these two reference photos, and we're going to find where the eyes fall on our egg shape head here on each of these photographs. We're going to map them out. We're going to map out the elevational high points using circles. We're going to point out some other important aspects of things that line up generally on most faces. And then we're going to talk a little bit about capturing likeness, but we're not going to go super deep into adding value and capturing likeness. So sometimes I definitely get a little carried away when I'm creating the images for these classes, but really we're just talking about basic facial proportions tonight. So we'll see how far we get in regards to capturing likeness in these photographs. But likeness is all about noticing the nuanced differences in various heads and faces. Okay, so let's take out, well, we don't need a ruler. We're just going to kind of create a box around this head, around my friend Aubrey's head. Okay, so we're drawing a box around it. And you can take a ruler if you want, or you can just eyeball it and see. So we're talking about the crown of her head, which her hair kind of goes up a little bit. So it's maybe not quite that high, but I wanted it to be a little higher than the edge. So maybe like somewhere in the middle of that cowlick that she's got there, but not at the top of it, and not because her head doesn't go that far, right? If we were to finish the curve of the head that we're seeing here, it's probably more like right here is the top of her scalp, right? Okay, so let's see where the center of her eyes fall. It's a little above halfway, so it's not quite at the halfway mark. We're going to draw a box around this head, and all these lines can be erased later if you want, or you can just embrace the map that we're creating here. Okay, so we're gonna go a little bit above halfway for Aubrey's eyeline. Let's go about here, and that's for the center of the eyes. And then let's see where the nose line falls. So typically the nose is going to be the bottom of the nose. The line at the bottom of the nose is typically going to fall about halfway down between the eye line and the chin line. So we've got eye line, nose line, and then we've got the chin line here. Okay, and that checks out. I feel like it's maybe just a little above halfway, but again, we're just eyeballing it. And we're just finding an approximation here. And then we're going to look at where the lip line falls. Typically, the lip line falls about, it's usually a third of the way down, because all of this, if you know anything about the golden ratio and the rule of thirds, what's happening here is we've got a rectangle, and then we've got this 1 to 1/3 ratio going all around the head. And I'm not going to go too deep into that because we only have an hour for the full class here, and I want to get as far as we can sketching. But basically the lips are about a third of the way down in this box that we've created from the nose to the chin. We can break everything down into smaller and smaller rectangles and keep going with the rule of thirds here with all of the face. But just know that the lips are about a third of the way down, but an easier way I've found to find where the lips are is to notice where this line is. So this little cleft that happens underneath the lips, and that is typically about halfway down between the nose line and the chin, and that looks like about halfway. And then we can more easily find the lip line at the center of the lips from that. Okay, so we've got the bottom of the nose, we've got the center of the eyes, and let's just draw a nice big creepy circle here on top. So we're gonna end up with like C-3PO head to start. Okay, so we've established where the eyes are, where the nose are, where the center of the lip is, and where this line at the bottom of the lip is. Okay, so that's where I want us to start. And then I want us to look at and then her hair is covering up the ears, but the ears are typically in line with the eye line and the bottom of the nose. So on most folks, you're going to see the top of the ears are in line with the center of the eyes, and the bottom of the ears in line with the center of the nose. But that changes with every face that you're looking at, because there is no perfectly proportioned face. We measure the face against the facial features of that person's face using their head and these general rules. Okay. So we've established where Aubrey's eye line is, where her nose line is, where the lip line is, and the chin line. Let's go ahead and just sketch in the hair here just so that we can get a little bit of a frame going. And her hair does kind of come over here and eclipse her face a little bit. And I've had tons of classes on drawing people and heads and figures up until this point in this series of classes with Michaels. One class that you might check out if you're struggling with drawing hair there was a class on drawing hair in colored pencil. A lot of these classes on drawing heads and people and figures do end up being premium classes. So those YouTube links to those classes are only sent to people who register ahead of time. So I don't have a ton of free classes to reference back, but that colored pencil class on drawing hair was definitely a free one. I also had a class on mapping and contouring faces where we broke down a photograph of my son. So that one covers children's facial proportions, and it covers a lot of this and goes pretty in depth because it's a 2-part class. So that was a free class that you could reference. Okay, moving on. So we've established the hair, we've established the eye line, but then we haven't looked at the eyebrows or anything else yet. But before we get to that, because I want to go very general to specific here, and if you're drawing nice and light, we haven't committed to anything yet. So it's easy to adjust and erase if something is off. So the next thing I like to look at when I'm just finding facial proportions and finding the shape of that particular person's head is look at these elevational points where light is going to hit the face more directly because the elevation is just higher, because the head is not flat. It's a convex and concave surface. Everything we're doing right now, we're looking at a head that is looking straight forward. Her head is tilted up slightly, but if she was, let's say, turned this way at a 3/4 view, then this line is not going to be straight. We're going to be looking at everything on a tilt, right? So everything is convex and concave on the head. So where is it the most? Where's the light hitting it the most is where the elevation is the highest, and that is the highest points on the cheekbones, the forehead, the chin where it protrudes forward, and then the tip of the nose. So we can go ahead and find those shapes on our sketch here. And since her hair kind of eclipses this circle, we're not really drawing a full circle there, but we can get a full circle on the cheekbones on either side here. And then the tip of the nose is going to be a little higher than that line at the bottom of the nose. And this is where I can see that her head is tilted a little bit up. So this line is actually not straight. It's actually more on a curve. So I'm going to.
Hey, Adrienne.
Oh, yes.
We are getting a lot of questions asking if you can draw a little bit darker. They're having a hard time seeing.
Okay, sure. So this
I
line.
have,
oh, yeah.
I have one question as well.
Oh, okay.
Can you explain elevation a little bit for them?
Okay, let's think about an elevational map, right? So we've got peaks and valleys. We've got a mountain and we've got a valley next to it. The mountain is high and the valley is low. So if we've got a mountain right here and we've got a sun shining next to the mountain, all this light is going to hit the top of the mountain, and then we're going to have a big shadowy valley on the side, right? High elevation, low elevation. So this is the tip of the nose. This is where the light's hitting it directly. And this is the shadow that happens underneath a nose. So that's where we've got low elevation. So everywhere where I put those big circles are where, and I'll darken everything up. I was keeping it nice and light so that when I go to add everything else, I can go a little darker. But all these things are represented in this sketch as well. I just drew them nice and light. So we've got all those things. They're just not quite as obvious because I drew them so lightly. And I did that so that I can adjust because I don't want to commit to anything. So I'm going to go ahead and say, no, I will not draw darker because if I commit to any of those lines just yet, then I might need to fix them. So, but I'm about to darken things up. So all I've done is sketch an egg shape, and I've drawn some lines and I've drawn some circles to establish these things. So everything I've done, I'll draw it nice and dark on the photograph. So I've got kind of a half circle here on the cheek, got a circle on the chin, a circle on the nose. Okay, that's all I've done on my paper so far. Okay, so now I want to establish if I've put things in the right place. So now I can look and see, where does the chin become a little more narrow at the jawline? Where does it come in right here? And it happens. And also I did not curve my lines on the head, but I didn't do that in my other example either. So I'm not going to worry too much about it, but it does help that I did it on the photograph. So having a curved line right here will be more accurate. Just didn't want to confuse us too much right off the bat. Okay, so we've got this sort of clown situation, clown face, and clowns really do kind of emphasize like the skeletal shapes on the face when they're putting on their clown makeup. They're, circling these things like on a skull, right? We've got these kind of high elevational points, and then there's these hollow shapes under the cheeks. There's kind of a triangle shape for the nose on a skull. Until I started breaking down these shapes on a human head, I never realized how much clowns are illustrating a skull on their face. So that's interesting. Okay, so back to my elevational things here. So this circle, we could make it a little bigger, and then we can notice that underneath the cheekbone right here, and just above the line where the curve under the lips is happening, just above that is where it starts to come in on the jawline. So I'm closing in on a more accurate face shape here instead of just that generic egg shape. And if you've drawn lightly enough, then you don't even need to erase any lines here. You can just darken your lines where you're adjusting. Okay, so I've come in a little more narrow there. And then I can see where I might need to narrow things up here by the eyes. And honestly, I think that head shape looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and start to sketch in where the eyebrows are. And I'm using that shape, that big circular shape that I put for the eyes. Think about our elevational points. The forehead is coming forward, and then we've got a low elevational point underneath the eyebrows. So to protect our eyes, we've got this eyebrow that comes forward, and then we've usually got a shadowy shape happening underneath the eyes that are created by that hood of the eyebrows. So I'm just going to go ahead and sketch in the eyebrows here right on top of that circle that I established for the eyes. But I'm still not darkening anything too much here because I don't want to commit until I've got all of these shapes filled in. Okay, so that triangular shape that I'm seeing underneath the nose, this triangular shape, I'm looking for the shape of the shadow and the shape of the light that's happening around here. So you can outline these organic shapes that you're seeing in the photograph. And this photo doesn't have a whole lot of contrasting light, but there's a little bit of a shape like this, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and sketch in that shape. And then this is where I can start to see if my proportions are correct. And I'm just going to use a diagonal hatching line to fill that in. Also, the recording of this class will be posted on YouTube later. So if you want to just kind of, if things are not coming together for you yet, maybe just watch and then let me get through one of them. You can always go back and rewatch this later if I'm going too fast or anything like that. But sometimes if I stop to illuminate things too much, I'm not going to get to the part where all the questions would be answered anyway. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the eyebrows and the nose using a diagonal hatching line right there. And that's looking pretty good. So if you wanted to erase, at this point, if you wanted to erase some of these lines that are in the way, you certainly can. But since it seems like they're not showing up super dark, I'm not going to worry about them and just draw on top of them here. Okay, so we drew this big empty eye socket like on a skull for the eyes, or at least I did. I drew a big circle shape for the eyes. So now on top of that, I can look and see where does the eye actually fall, but I don't focus on outlines when I'm drawing. And if you go back and look at any of the classes I've done up until now, and I've got plenty of classes coming up where you can follow along if you like my teaching style, but I look at the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So I'm looking at the value, and the value tells me that there's a big shadowy shape here that connects all of the eyelashes and the side of the eye together and the hood of the eye. And so I'm just sketching that shape on top of that eye socket shape. I'm looking at some of the shadows that I'm seeing there on the eyelid. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill in the pupil. Okay, and if your eyes are feeling, if the eyes in this sketch are feeling too far apart or too close together, you can use your pencil to measure the width of the eye in the photograph and then see how many eyes wide that person's head is. So the average person's face is 5 of their eyes wide. So you can measure one eye and then see, is there a distance in between the eyes of one eye? And there is on Aubrey. And then on the side of the head, sometimes that breaks down because of hair being in the way. We can't really see the side of her head there, but also the fact that, her head continues it keeps going over here. We just can't see it. It's like the moon. We only see the part of the moon that is facing us, right? So there's more space over here between the eye and her ear, but it's just curved. So we only see a part of it. But really, that measurement of in between the eyes is where it can be most helpful. And then you can see what the distance is between the edge of the eye and the visible side of the face, because that's not the edge of her face. It doesn't just fall off right there, right? Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm still not committing too much to anything, because if you commit too quickly to these shapes and start darkening your lines and shading everything super heavy, and then you realize your proportions are off and you've got to move an entire eye, it feels way more daunting than having to move a sketch of a circle. So that's why I am always so hesitant to commit to sketching full shapes just yet. All right. And then here's why I didn't want to commit just yet, because I want to measure and see, does her tear duct line up in my sketch with the edge of the nose? Because typically on most faces, the tear duct will line up with the edge of the nose, and then the center of the pupil will line up with the line at the center of the lips. And that is the dark part in the center of the lips when the mouth is closed. That's not referring to the edge of the the meaty part of the lips. I like to say lips are like butter melting on a piece of toast, because the skin of the lips kind of just melts into the face, and especially if that person's wearing lipstick, it might be a little more defined, but on most lips, that's not a very defined line. It's not very defined right here. So if you try to find the edge of the lips, it can be very challenging. But if you find that line at the center of the pupils and the pupils look like they're in the right place in your drawing, then you can draw those dotted lines down from the tear duct to see where the edge of the nose needs to be. And this is where I can see my nose needs to come out just a little bit wider right there to meet that line. And then this is where I could see like if my eyes were a little too far apart or if they needed to come in a little closer. So this line at the center of the lips. And then we can sort of fill in the lips from there based on all this other information. Sometimes it's also easier to sketch this shape that's happening underneath the nose and use that shape to help you find the top of the lips. But again, I try not to make it a super hard edged line right here. I look more for what the value is doing. Where's the dark, shadowy shape the darkest? And I'm using mostly a diagonal hatching line to fill things in. And then same thing on the other side of the lip, looking for the shape of the shadow and then the shape of the light. And then that all looks pretty okay. So I'm gonna put the little reflective light in the eye here. And I'm just gonna fill that in with a diagonal hatching line. Because again, I said at the beginning, we aren't gonna spend a ton of time on these facial features. We just wanna talk about mapping the head and finding the facial proportions and a little bit about capturing likeness. So I think I even went a little farther with that one than I did in this original sketch here. Okay, so if this is your first time drawing a head and trying to capture facial features on a head and line all these things up, please do not be hard on yourself. This is something that takes years of practice to get right. It was something that I scrapped for years in my personal practice and did a lot of still lifes and interiors and, drawing rooms and landscapes. And I avoided drawing people for a long time in my career because capturing a human head is a very challenging subject. But those are the basics there. And really, it comes down to the light, to understanding what the light is doing. So if you want to stick with me for more classes, we'll come back around to that multiple times. And I focus on that in almost every class that I do. And yeah, but this was just about basic facial proportions for adults tonight. And next week will be children's facial proportions. But let's move on to this other head and we'll do the same thing. Okay, so how are we doing, Chanel? Any other pressing comments or questions?
We just had one come through. Is it okay to have an easel and a drawing table if comfortable?
Yeah, definitely, if that's the most comfortable for you. Okay. So yeah, that's as far as I'm gonna go on mapping that one head. And then now we're gonna do this other one. So I like to start with that circle shape and I'm just gonna draw it directly on the photograph for you so you can see where I'm seeing that circle shape. So we've got the circle and then we've got the the half oval shape, although depending on the head that we're observing, you know, that the shape is going to change, just like it did with Aubrey's. We narrowed things up, and this one might be a little broader for the jawline. But we're going to start with a circle. And then we're going to do a nice big, just since I did it there, I can see like on my boyfriend's head, it needs to come down a little more like this, but we're probably going to shift that a little bit as well. Okay, so let's leave the circle on there this time instead of erasing it completely like I did before, because when I just sketched it on his head, we can see that it comes down under the nose. So that could be helpful. Also, the last time I didn't draw the vertical axis on my map here. But let's go ahead and sketch that. And if you had a white pen, like I happen to have a white pen right here, I can draw my little box. Since we've got this black background, be easy to see the box. Okay, and then we'll find that line at the center of the eyes, and let's see if it's curved. His head is also tilted up just slightly, so that line is a little curved. But they're both facing straight forward, so that's why the vertical line is not on a curve. If their head was on a tilt, then that line will be tilted. So like next week in the children's proportions class, I'll just go ahead and show you. I'm using a photo of my daughter and my son, and both of their heads are slightly tilted in both pictures. So we're not looking at a perfectly straight line. We're looking at a diagonal line for both of those heads next week. And like I said, I maybe got a little carried away when I'm, you know, creating the advertisements for this class and adding more details than we really have time to cover when we're just mapping the heads here. But we're not gonna make a super detailed drawing of these heads. We're just talking about the basic facial proportions. I want you to have a understanding of how to apply this to any photograph. Okay, so we've got the vertical axis, and you can draw that box around your egg shape again if you need to help you see the halfway line. But just looking at this, I can see that his eyes are more than halfway up on the head. So I'm going to do the eye line about here. Again, I don't want to make that line too dark so that I can adjust it later if I need to. And then I can see that my nose line, or his nose line, kind of comes right above where I drew that circle on there. So I can do like that, and that's helpful. And then the line underneath the lips, you can also use this line of the actual center of the lips as your measurement. I just find I can always find where the lips go a little easier if I start with the shadowy shape under the lips, because again, that's a concave area. The lips come forward, so the elevation is higher, and then there's a shadow underneath the lips, and that helps me find that shape. And then I can go just above that and see where the center of the lip line needs to go. Okay, so Next thing I want to do is find the highest elevational points on the head. So the forehead, the center of the forehead, the highest part of the cheekbones, the tip of the nose, and where the chin comes forward. So all of these are where the light is going to hit more directly. If we had a bunch of contrasting light in these photographs, which we don't, this is again why I'm not focusing so much on likeness in today's class, because if I was, I would want a photograph that had a little more shadows to help us see what the light is doing. But I wanted to use these photographs because they show the whole head and we're just mapping the head tonight. Okay, so we've got the cheekbone circle on either side. We've got the tip of the nose, the highest point on the forehead, and where the chin comes forward. Okay, and then we can go ahead and do another big circle for the eye socket. Maybe made my cheekbone circle a little high on this side. Okay, so I haven't committed to anything yet. If you're drawing really dark shapes at this point, that could really, be frustrating because you might need to adjust a lot of things. Another shape that can be really helpful right here is using kind of a triangle shape, because there's often going to be a triangle right here with the jawbone, and that shape can help you see, what's happening with the jawline. So if things are feeling really off on yours so far, you could try sketching that triangle shape in there. And then you can see how far up or how far down you need to move the jawline. Okay, so with that being said, I can see that I need to move my jawline up quite a bit right here. And I'm going to use the edge of the lip line again to see like what the distance is between the edge of the lips and where the jawline starts to narrow. And that's about right there. Got a very Iron Man sort of helmet head thing going so far. Which is what you want. This is called drawing general to specific. And this is all based on that particular person that you're drawing. It's going to be slightly different for everyone. Okay, and we can see the ears in this photograph, and we can see that the ears are in line with the eye line. The top of the ears are in line with the eye line, and the bottom of the ears are in line with the bottom of the nose line. Okay, and then we can sketch in a little bit of the hair. And we can see if we need to adjust the shape of the head in any way. So if your head is looking too wide or too narrow or too long in relationship to all of these shapes, And in relationship to the shapes in the photograph, this is where you make these adjustments. Okay, so my printout did not print super dark shadows right here. And Ryan, my partner, does have very light eyebrows, but I'm just going to outline where I'm seeing the eyebrow shape and the shadow that I'm seeing right here. And I'm going to kind of emphasize it in the photograph. So I'm looking for this kind of crescent moon shape right there, and maybe like a boomerang shape of a shadow here to help guide me about where to put the eyebrows. It's all about the value, the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So if I ignore everything except for what I see the light doing, I can get pretty far in a drawing. If I map out all of these facial proportions and then I just look for what the light is doing, that can help me quite a bit. Okay, and then now I'm looking for this shadow underneath the nose, and we've got a lot of facial hair here, creating a nice big shadowy shape. So I'm just going to sketch that shape. I'm going to do a big shadow for the facial hair. Or actually, I'm going to draw this little shape under the nose too. I'm going to lump it all together here. So I look at the relationships between one value shape to the next. So the shape of the shadow of the facial hair is going to guide me on where I need to place the lips. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I've got the lips and the eyes in the right place. So I'll go back up here and sketch a little bit of the eyes so that I can at least get the circle for the pupil in there. My drawing's looking really angry so far. I guess because I've got all these really sharp lines. Okay, so now I can draw my dotted line from the pupil and see if I hit the edge of that line at the center of the lips, and I do. And maybe it's because I turned that line down that it's looking so angry. If I turn it upside down, make it smile, then it doesn't look that way anymore. Okay, so the line at the center of the pupils is telling me I'm in the right spot. The line from the tear duct is telling me the nose is in the right spot. And then now I can add, I'm going to grab a darker pencil real quick to go a little faster with some of these shadows. And then if there's time, well, it doesn't look like there is. I was going to say I could go back and add a little bit more details to the other sketch. But I'm just going to use a darker pencil to just get some darker values going here. So it's really all about paying attention to what the light and the dark is doing. Also, when it comes to necks, you might just kind of feel the skin under your ear and notice how your neck is growing underneath your ears. It's right there. So it's a lot wider than sometimes beginning artists will put it on the head. Sometimes they will make the neck a little too narrow. Like I just kind of made it too narrow in talking about that. I don't think I even put a neck on Aubrey's to start. Okay, but I don't want to go too much into body proportions and stuff just now. So that is basically it. I feel like I'm done, but I feel like I also maybe missed something. Maybe adding a little more of this shadow here. Any questions at this point?
There is one question. How many lines from the pupil to the lip can I measure?
How many lines from the pupil to the lip? I'm not quite sure what that question means.
I wasn't sure either. I was hoping you did.
Okay, I'm like, Well, the thing that I've heard is, you know, there's that one line from the center of the pupil that should hit the dotted line. This vertical line should line up with the very edge of the line at the center of the mouth. So that just tells you if your lips are, you know, too narrow. Like if I drew the lip and the edge of the lips were way over here, then that tells me my eyes are either too wide on the head or my lips are too narrow. So I either need to make the lip wider or I need to bring the eyes in, you know, if that line is not adding up. Or there is the rare case where you draw that on the photograph and that line from the center of their pupil doesn't hit the lips because everybody's facial features are different. You know, you could have somebody whose ears are not, you know, in line with their eyes. I mean, that happens all the time. And all those little idiosyncrasies about our faces where they are not symmetrical or they don't line up in certain ways, that's what makes us us and what makes us look like us. So don't edit those things out of your drawing. You know, if you're putting that in your drawing, that's how you're going to capture likeness of the person. So thank you everyone saying great class. I love that feedback. I'd love to see some of your sketches. If anybody wants to hold up their sketch and share their sketch for tonight. I know we didn't put a whole lot of detail on them, just mapping the heads here, but if you just hold up your sketch, our moderator can spotlight you. You can see, I love to see a page of notes too. Oh, look at that. Oh, that looks just like him. You really captured some likeness there. Lovely, thank you. Please share these with me. I'd love to share them with my partner and my best friend. Oh, look at that. Yes. I know. I love how when you do this, everybody's capturing a little bit of likeness of these people in my life in a different sort of way. Lovely. Oh, I wanted to see the other one, but we moved on. Oh, I love the detail there on those eyes so far. I love that you were not committing to some of your lines underneath until you found those proportions. Oh, yes. Those are beautiful eyes. Oh, my first head drawing. That's pretty great for your first head drawing. Look at that. I love all those proportion sketching. Yeah, if this is your first time doing this, that is incredible. Please keep going. Just keep practicing like this 20 minutes a day. I've seen people do a head per day, draw a head every day like this, and you'll be amazed how much your skills will progress. I love a page of notes. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Oh, look at that. Oh, I like how you squeezed them both in. Love good diagram. Those are great diagrams. All right. Okay, well, we are at the end of the hour, so hopefully you all will join me next week for drawing the children's facial proportions. So we're going to be doing the exact same thing with two photographs, with a photograph of my my daughter and my son, which they will not have this much detail in them. We're really just going to be mapping the heads. I had to stop myself when I was sketching from not adding all the likeness in there, but I also wanted it to be an eye-catching class. But I wish we could get farther than we did in an hour with questions and everything. But we'll see how far we can get with the children's facial proportions next week. But I'll definitely show you how to map and find the proportions of a child's head next week. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.